channel. My name is Jessica and this is a Survivor's Guide to Life, where I talk about all things trauma, the brain, and healing. So if that's your jam, go right ahead and click that subscribe button down below so you can be notified every time I upload a new video. So today I have finally shot part 2 of When They See Us. So this is my reaction to that amazing docu-series, which, yeah, Netflix kind of released a couple months back and I'm a little bit late. So if you want to check out part 1, I will link the description down below and also at the end of the video at the card, on one of the card sections, so you can go ahead and watch that. I suggest you watch that first before you watch this one. And of course, because I'm doing a reacting to series, there will probably be some spoilers. One of the reasons it took me so long to do part 2 was because part 1 was so hard for me to film. Just watching the first 2 episodes, so in case you don't know, because you didn't watch the first video that I did, or you haven't watched When They See Us, they tracked the case of the Central Park 5, who were young African-American men who were charged and prosecuted and subsequently found guilty of raping and assaulting a white female jogger who was jogging in Central Park. So the first 2 episodes of the 4-part series kind of went through what happened when they were younger, just like a little bit about their backstory, but basically like what the investigation and the prosecution. And then the last 2 episodes, which I'll be talking about today, focused on, interestingly enough, the 3rd episode just kind of tracked 4 of the boys, kind of, not, and I shouldn't say track because they didn't go through every single detail, but kind of talked about, you know, showed kind of their experience briefly in jail, then how hard it was for them once they got out. But the last episode, episode 4, focused predominantly, and I would say 99% of it, on Corey's story. And I feel like for that, part of the reason they did that is because Corey was, I believe, 16 years old when he was convicted, whereas the other 4 boys were between like 14 and 15. Corey actually was sent initially to Rikers, while the other boys spent time initially in juvie, and they received, I guess, like the maximum amount of time there because they were so young. This is not to minimize like their experience or anything, but just kind of giving some clarification about, I think, why the producers or directors decided to go down the road that they did, in terms of they kind of not glossed over, but that's the way it felt in episode 3. We didn't really get too much of the boys' individual stories inside juvie, but we did get a lot of what happened to Corey, and it was very, very upsetting, to say the least. So I'm sure you're wondering, why is she talking about this series? What does that have to do with her channel? Because on this channel I talk about things related to trauma, and I also talk about attachment, and I talk about the brain and healing. One of the things that was so key as I was watching this whole series was just the amount of trauma that these boys individually experienced, because they weren't guilty, right? They weren't guilty. They had to be, and I talked about in the first part of this video, so I'm not going to rehash it, but the trauma of being arrested and assaulted by police officers, how that affected the stress response system, kind of the dissociation that occurred, why they might have said they did it when they didn't. All of that is in kind of part 1. But when I watched kind of this part 2, one of the things that was really interesting that I noticed, and I had also noticed, noted in the first part that I did. I'm going to start off by kind of talking about their attachment relationships, because, you know, one of the things that we are basically born with, our 2 kind of innate drives as human beings, is to protect ourselves and to feel love, right? To be connected to somebody else, a community, find a sense of belonging. It's that love piece, right? And that your attachment foundation with your primary caregivers, whether that's your biological parents, grandparents, adoptive parents, whatever, there's that foundational piece that kind of gives that template of our relationships and what we seek out as we get older. that is all attachment related. And then you get your trauma stuff, not trauma, sorry, your stress response system. Again, this is when we become triggered because, you know, we feel a sense of threat. We feel the need to kind of protect ourselves or guard ourselves. All of that comes, that kind of impulse that we have to react in a certain way. That's that stress response system kind of mechanism of things. And when somebody's experienced trauma, you know, one of the things that research has shown, and me as a therapist in my practice, what I've noticed for clients who, those people who develop, kind of end up developing more lifelong symptoms related to trauma, like PTSD, depression, anxiety, things of that nature, low self-esteem. One of the things that kind of can mitigate some of that, those long-term effects, is the support system that they have at the time that the trauma has been found out, whether that's sexual trauma, physical trauma, anything like that. Having that, what we call like a relational buffer, somebody to who we love and trust and feel supported and nurtured by, can kind of help us see that, you know, the world is not so bad, can help us kind of recover and process the incidents that happen. And so in watching this series, for I would say 3 of the boys, I noted very clear, like, secure attachment relationships that they had with their moms. Moms who visited them while they were in jail, and spoke to them, had faith in them, you know, fought for them, and then when they came home after their release, they, you know, took care of them and, you know, helped them as they kind of, and even like when the trial was going on, they were there for them, right? They didn't know exactly what had happened, but once they realized what was going on, they were there, they were fighting, you know, that love, that support, constantly saying it. One of the guys, I can't remember which one, unfortunately. I believe it was either Kevin or Antoine. It was adorable. So after the 4 of the boys had gotten out of juvenile hall, 2 of the guys, and it was Kevin, I believe it was Kevin and Antoine, I want to say, they were not hanging out, that's not what they were doing. They were together. They had to go to, because they were all they had to register as sex offenders. So part of the program was to go and sit like in a meeting with other sex offenders, and they had to say, you know, I did this thing and I repent or what have you. So they had just met each other there, and I believe it was Antoine who was like, you know, my mom she hugs me all the time. I get out of the shower, she's right there saying she loves me, and she gives me a big hug. And that is like the epitome of love and belonging, right? Like, he went through this trauma, just huge trauma, being tried, being convicted, being blamed for something. Who knows? I don't know his story about what happened to him in juvenile hall, but, you know, it's not a great place to be, obviously. And when he got out, his mom was still there, and she supported him, and she loved him, and he felt that love, right? And I feel like that was one of those mitigating circumstances that helped him to be able to kind of move on with his life. Like, he's married, he's got kids, and a couple of the other dudes, like the other 2 of the other boys also. Yusuf was another one. He is Muslim, and he found a wife. He's at the end it said he had 10 children, which I was like, oh my gosh, like, that's a lot of kids. But when he was in juvie, he found and connected more with his religion, and that was like a nice foundation of support for him. And then when he got out, he got married, his family was there, they were supportive. And then we look at 2 of the other boys, you know, Corey, who's, oh god, his story is so sad, where his mom, which we didn't know early on, but we found out in the 4th episode, like, she had substance abuse problem, and he had a sister who was trans, and, you know, while he was inside, his sister got murdered. And because he was so far away, and I'm putting that in quotes because it was really interesting, I made this note of, like, the mom kept saying, like, I can't visit you, you're so far away. And so he kept, like, trying to apply for transfers and get transferred to this prison and that prison so he could, in hopes of being closer so his mom would visit more. And he was, like, not super attached, but it was, like, insecurely attached to his mom. He was the only one, like, when he was convicted, he was like, Mama, like, screaming, crying. I mean, it was, like, classic signs of insecure attachment. I couldn't give you which one because I don't know his full story, but I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent. Sorry, but it was like so clear to me that he was insecurely attached even at 16 years old. But one of the notes I made when the mom was like, I can't come so often, you know, it's too far, I don't have the money. And I was like, something's off here. And I literally made the note, which I said, his mom rarely saw him in prison. She said it was because of money, but I suspect some drug use was involved. And literally the next clip was literally a clip between his sister and the mom getting into an argument in which the sister's like, well, you know, you want to talk about me, but you're up in here selling out of our house. And I was like, I knew it. I knew she was on drugs. And then later on, she had said like she had found God again and she wasn't on that stuff anymore. And I was like, I could always smell some like substance abusing parent here. And, you know, people don't think about that. Like, I've worked with many parents who are like, oh, no, my kid had no idea. But, like, you're not available for your child if you're high. I'm sorry. I know marijuana is legal and I'm going to get added and people are going to talk about me about, but, like, you just cannot be fully available when you're under the use of a substance. Whether you drink daily or you use drugs daily or what, it doesn't matter. You cannot, you're using for a reason. Parents are using for a reason. And we're not here to talk about that. But children require so much attention and they rely on you so heavily. And if you are on a substance, you cannot fully attune to their needs. And what happens is, because you are kind of out of it, that impacts, like, it's a reciprocal relationship. So what you give to your child's going to give back to you. So if you're not available, then they've got to figure out how to manage some other way because they're vulnerable, right? And what was most interesting and what killed me the most, I think, about Corey's story is that it was so obvious to me that there was something off with him. I don't know if he was developmentally delayed. I don't know if it's a trauma response, which I talked about in the first video about how when people kind of experience trauma, especially early on during their childhood, they end up kind of missing some developmental steps. Some parts get overly developed, usually the stuff related to survival, while the other stuff just kind of remains underdeveloped, because we all have the capacity to be anything, but it's what kind of gets nurtured consistently, which expands and like allows us to grow to like our full potential, right? And so his like inability to read was like key. I mean, come on, he's 16 and can't read. But also his social interactions, the way he spoke, it was so clear to me that developmentally he was a lot younger than 16, and it just, oh my God, I was just so upset. I was upset at his mom. I was upset at the whole system. It was a whole thing. I was very upset watching this story. I'm not a big crier, but I almost cried a couple times just on his story alone, because all I saw was trauma. And I'll come back in a second I'll stick with Corey. Something else that was really interesting with Corey, which also signaled for me like this person has some insecure attachment, was he went to 3 different prisons. So he started off at Rikers, he then went to Attica, and then after he went to Wend. And when he was at Attica, he got beat up by 4, maybe 5 white men because, you know, if you don't know anything about prison, I don't know how you can with all the prison dramas out there, but prison's very, very segregated. And this is an African-American male, and the rape was against a white woman. So this is also 89, right? So the racial tensions, all of that stuff, they were like, you raped this woman, we're gonna basically beat the crap out of you. And the guard just kind of watched it happen, which infuriated me, how many guards were like that. But anyway, he went to solitary, and when he was there was a white prison guard who just treated him humanely, and it was, I applaud of this prison guard doing this. That this is not like a knock against him, but one of the things I noticed that Corey was doing was he had like started to build like a trust towards this prison guard, and it was in a weird way that like he kind of was vulnerable. And one of the things that I see for my clients who have insecure attachment, they've experienced some of that emotional abuse, some physical stuff, physical abuse, maybe even some neglect, is they misread social cues, which is huge, but also like they what we call like indiscriminately attach, right? And even though he was the oldest kid, he was a follower. And one of the things that was so interesting, the way they directed this, as they followed his story, when he was in solitary, he kept hallucinating. He kept reliving. Again, this is, having basically flashbacks of the night where he was just out with this girl that he really liked, and then his friends were like banging on him, like, hey, come to the park with us. And he just kept saying, like, I should know, I'm just gonna stay. Which is what he didn't do that, but like he was, trying to kind of, one of the trauma responses is sort of to replay scenarios over and over and over to try to master it. So it was a little bit of that, but it was just also interesting that as the older kid, like, he had that urge to stay, but then he also wanted to fit in with his friends. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about that loving and belonging, that attachment piece that we're all born with. He didn't listen to his gut to stay there. Instead, he went with the group. And then in this instance with the police officer, again, this prison guard, he trusted them. And he never did anything, thank gosh, but he could have victimized him, and he would have fallen prey. There was another instance, even the instance of him like trusting the guard, the police officer, who was like, no, and the prosecutor who were like, no, just tell the story, like, you'll be okay. He trusted them, and I put trust in quotes because it's like an artificial trust, and that all of that stuff to me was like attachment issues. This person is insecurely attached. He needs people to be looking out for him. So that was just like a really interesting part of his story in particular. And then the other person, whose name was Ray, who happened to be, he was actually, interestingly enough, the only Mexican kid, who was also convicted. I don't know what happened to his mom. His mom was never talked about, but his dad was there, and his dad visited him, and his dad talked to him on the phone, and his dad allowed him to come stay in the house. But his stepmother was she was angry, and she definitely provoked the situation. And it was weird because his dad, even though he was trying to be there for his son, he always had faith in him, he still wasn't fully available, and I felt like didn't really meet Ray's needs. And as a result, and he definitely and I guess it's rock in a hard place, but I'm sure there was some stuff that happened before this. He took his wife's side, and Ray was kind of left out in the cold. It was like it was more emotional, but I could totally tell that the attachment stuff, his attachment needs were not being met. And then he ended up, falling into a life of crime. And I mean, not like that, I'm being very dramatic about it. He just was selling drugs because he needed more money, and he had found a girlfriend or what have you. And so then he ended up going to jail. So that was kind of the attachment piece that I really noticed a lot in this last part of the docu-series. It was really big on attachment. So to wrap it all up, I feel like this docu-series was actually an interesting example of trauma and attachment. The first part definitely focused more, in my opinion, on kind of the trauma aspects for these youth, what happened to them. But the second part really, I feel like, highlighted the importance of the attachment relationship between parent and child, and how it can kind of mitigate some of those effects of trauma. So I highly recommend that you watch the docu-series, can't speak English, the docu-series, if you haven't already. Do some research. Also, I feel like it gives you a good glimpse into, if you are not a person of color and you don't quite understand the protective nature that African Americans have, especially over our boys, watch this series, because these boys were innocent. They were found guilty, and look at the way their lives were impacted because of it, and the way that they were treated. And this is, the examples to this day of police brutality, the mistreatment in the justice system of black people compared to white people. Like, it's a reality, whether you want to face it or not. All of that is traumatizing. All of that creates a lot of fear and anxiety, and that the importance of you, especially if you are a black parent, being a secure base for your child, because the world out there doesn't like our children, doesn't like us. We're not the same. We're not treated fairly. And yes, we want to prepare them for that harsh reality, but you want to be that secure base. You want to be that person who just randomly hugs your child and tells your child how much you love them, because the world out there is not going to do it. So that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, go right ahead and click that like button, or smash that like button. I've been hearing that a lot lately, and I kind of like that, but I feel like it's stealing if I say it. But whatever. Click the like button. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't before. I love meeting new people. You can also head over to my Instagram page if you want more tips, tricks on trauma, on the brain, on attachment, mental health related stuff. It's over there as well. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one.